This is Harsh Rules. I'm Ben Harsh, and today we're going to learn to play Shogun, also known as Samurai Swords, and recently released as Ikusa. Shogun was released in 1986 by Milton Bradley as part of their GAMEMASTER series and designed by Michael Gray. Shogun supports 5 players and takes about 4 to 6 hours to play. The game takes place in 16th century Japan during the Sengoku period. Feudal warlords battle for control of the country and the ultimate title of Shogun. You assume the role of one of these feudal lords and attempt to defeat your opponents and unify the provinces under your rule. In 1995, Milton Bradley re-released Shogun under its new title, Samurai Swords. Rumor has it there was a trademark dispute between this game and James Clavell's Shogun board game. Besides the name change, everything else regarding the game is essentially the same as the first edition. Most recently, a 3rd edition of Shogun was released in 2011, this time under a new name, Ikusa. The game received brand new art from Steve Argyle, and the styrofoam castle bases were upgraded to molded plastic. The only downside to this version of Ikusa is that the very cool katana swords for choosing turn order were replaced with turn markers, which are just cardboard. The rules are identical to the 1st and 2nd edition, so this is merely a visual upgrade. But what is the actual gameplay like? Well, let's take a look. I can only speak to history as I lived it back in the 80s. And back in the 80s, my friends and I played a lot of Risk in junior high and high school. Once you've played Risk to death, you're looking around for something a little meatier. And back in the 80s, that was the GAMEMASTER series. In fact, several of the games in the GAMEMASTER series are essentially upgraded versions of Risk. Specifically with Conquest of the Empire and Shogun, it's very easy to see the Risk DNA under the more complex rules. And in this video, we're going to look at how Michael Gray and Milton Bradley took the foundation of Risk and built it up into Shogun, a game so popular that it has been re-released as Samurai Swords, and most recently reborn as Ikusa. So let's take a closer look at this latest incarnation of Shogun called Ikusa. Ikusa, in Japanese, means war or battle. This game takes place in 16th century medieval Japan. During this time, called the Sengoku period, Japan is divided amongst several feudal warlords. In this game, you will assume the role of one of these warlords. Each player will receive a castle tray with a colored screen, denoting their faction. The 68 provinces of Japan are divided up amongst these warlords. Each province is printed on a playing card in the province deck. At the beginning of the game, the province deck is randomly dealt out to each of the 5 players. Each player begins the game with the same amount of provinces. To win the game and achieve the ultimate title of Shogun, one player must capture 35 provinces. To accomplish this lofty goal, each feudal lord must master the various units under his command. Each class of unit will either be a melee fighter or a ranged fighter. Combat results are tracked on a 12-sided dice. The first unit class is the Daimyo. When attacking on a 12-sided dice, the Daimyo hits on a 6 or less. Every player has 3 of these commander figures. Second is the Samurai group. The Samurai group is composed of swordsman figures and bowman figures. Samurai swordsmen hit on a 5 or less. Bowmen are ranged figures that hit on a 6 or less. Next is the Ashigaru group. This group is composed of spearmen and gunmen. Both figures hit on a 4 or less. Next is the Ronin group. Ronin are masterless samurai who act as mercenaries that can be hired for one round of play. A Ronin hired sword hits on a 5 or less. Finally is the ninja group. Ninjas can conduct a special assassination attack or spy on other players. We'll cover off on this unit later in the tutorial. Equipped with your armies, you will attack by land and by sea. Using diplomacy with other players and raw military force, the game proceeds in traditional territory control fashion. Until at last, one player has secured 35 provinces and claimed the ultimate title of Shogun. But that's just a basic conceptual view of how the game is played. Next, we're going to go into each aspect of gameplay in much greater detail. Now that you have a basic idea of how the game is played, and you're still sticking around, you know what time it is. Get your bits together, people. It's time to set up the game. First, you're going to place the game board. For this tutorial, we're going to use the latest version of Shogun called Ikusa. However, the games are very similar to each other, so if you have Shogun or samurai swords, you should be able to follow along fairly easily. In Ikusa, there are 68 provinces in the country. Each province has an associated province card. Much like classic Risk, you will deal out province cards to each player. Next, each player will place one spearman of the color they own on each of their provinces. Keep in mind that each province has a stacking limit of 5 figures. In a 5-player game, starting provinces and money called KOKU are divided up as follows. Each player will be dealt 13 cards from the province deck. They will start the game with 4 KOKU. With a 5-player game setup, there are 3 provinces that will remain open. With only 4 players, each player is dealt 17 cards from the province deck, and begin the game with 5 KOKU. In this configuration, there are no empty provinces. In a 3-player game, each player will be dealt 22 province cards, and will start the game with 7 KOKU. In this configuration, there will be 2 open provinces when the game begins. Finally, in a 2-player game, each player will be dealt 34 cards from the province deck, and begin the game with 11 KOKU. With 2 players, there are no empty provinces when you begin the game. However, each player will need to use 2 colors to represent their forces. For our tutorial example, we're going to use a 5-player game. Each player will be dealt 13 province cards and place a spearman of their color on the provinces they own. So on our board, first we'll establish the brown player's provinces, next the purple player's provinces, then the orange player's provinces, the green player's provinces, and finally the blue player's provinces. Now, because this is a 5-player game, you'll notice that there are 3 provinces that are unoccupied. Be aware of these provinces as they may be early objectives in the game. Next, you're going to arrange the army cards around the board where each player sits. Now, let's talk about how these army cards interact with the main board. In Ikusa, you do not try to cram your armies all on the main board. Armies are maintained on a second board called the army card. Each player can field a maximum of 3 armies. The position of each of these armies is tracked on the main game board with these banner figures. The banner on the board that does not have a peg underneath it represents the current position of the army. The matching banner figure with the peg under the base is used for tracking the daimyo's experience on the army card. You'll also notice that there are one of these figure types in each shape. figures with a circular base, figures with a diamond base, and figures with an octagonal base. These figure shapes match the crests on your army card. The banner figure with the peg gets plugged into the first hole in the associated spot on the army card. For example, the banner figure with the circular base is plugged into the first hole on the army card above the circular Ogawa clan crest. You will conduct the same action for the banner figure with the diamond base and the octagonal base. The grids overlapping the family clan crests is where you'll place your starting army figures. Each clan starts with the following figures. On the top row of each, the first position is the daimyo, the second position is the samurai bowman, the third position is the samurai swordsman, and then on the second row, the first two positions are ashigaru gunmen. You will complete this setup for each of your 3 daimyo armies. As a final note, each of these armies have a stacking limit of 15 figures. There is always 1 daimyo, 4 samurai, and 10 ashigaru. To complete the remainder of the setup, we need to determine the turn order. If you are playing Shogun or samurai swords, you will determine turn order with these plastic katana. Each katana has a set of diamonds on the blade, numbered from 5 to 1. I've highlighted these diamonds to make them easier to see. On the real katana swords, they're black just like the rest of the sword. One player will hold the katana in his fist with the handle sticking out and the diamonds hidden. Then, like the classic drawing straws, each player will draw a sword. The order of play is determined by the number of diamonds on the blade of each sword. If you're playing with a copy of Ikusa, and you have not stolen plastic katana swords from an older copy of the game, then you get these cardboard markers. Place them face down so you can't see the number, and stir them up. Each player will draw a cardboard marker, and that will determine his turn order. So for our gameplay example, let's say our colors fall in this order. A quick note, this turn order is only established for the setup. In each subsequent turn of the main game, you will redecide the turn order. Once you have your turn order established, each player is going to take out 12 spearmen. Following turn order, each player is going to put down 2 spearmen in a province they own with only 1 spearman in it. In other words, you can't pile up your spearmen in 1 province. You must divide them up into 6 provinces. First, the orange player places 2 of his spearmen in the province of Mutsu. So now there are a total of 3 spearmen in this province. Next, the brown player places his 2 spearmen. The blue player places 2 spearmen. The purple player places his 2 spearmen. The green player places 2 spearmen. After 6 rounds of this, all 12 spearmen for each player will be placed. Finally, following turn order, each player will place their banner figures marking the locations of their armies. We'll start with the daimyo with the circular base. Then the diamond base. And finally, the hexagon base. And with that, the setup process is complete. Next, we're going to walk through the phases of gameplay. In Ikusa, gameplay falls into 3 phases. The first phase is for planning. The second phase is for actions. And the final phase is to wage war. So let's get started by walking through the planning phase. In the planning phase, each player is going to take his allocated koku and secretly plan out his expenditures. You will place your koku in specific bins to communicate how you're going to spend your money. The first bin is for bidding on the turn order. The second bin requires 2 koku to build a castle or upgrade a castle to a fortress. The third bin is to levy units. The fourth bin is a bid to hire the ninja. And the fifth bin is to hire ronin. Now, let's look at these categories in greater detail to see the advantages of each. First, you can spend koku to bid on turn order. The player with the most koku in this bin gets to choose the number in the order of play. If other players place koku in this bin, they also get to choose their number in the order of play. However, those who bid the most get to choose first. Players who do not bid have to randomly choose from what's left. If a player chooses to build, they must place 2 koku in the bin. With these 2 koku, they can purchase a castle or upgrade a castle to a fortress. Castles can be placed in any province that you own. Once placed, they cannot be moved and they cannot be destroyed. Therefore, if another player takes that province, he or she also takes the castle. The benefit of having a castle in a province is that the castle has 4 permanent spearmen defenders attached to it. So if your province is attacked and you're defending, you get these 4 bonus spearmen. However, all casualties must come from this group of spearmen first. If you survive the battle and another force attacks your province, the defenders replenish back to 4. If you spend another 2 koku after you've built a castle, you can upgrade it to a fortress. The fortress functions similar to the castle except for your defenders are now 5 ronin. Obviously, ronin warriors are much stronger than spearmen. Spearmen hit on a 4 or less on a 12-sided dice. Ronin hit on a 5 or less on a 12-sided dice. The next bin is to levy units. For every koku you spend, you can select one of the following options. You can purchase 1 bowman, or 2 swordsmen, or a swordsman and a gunner, or 2 gunners, or 3 spearmen. A final note, be aware that you can only place 1 figure in a province at a time. For example, you cannot add all 3 spearmen to 1 province. They must be divided amongst 3 provinces. Therefore, you are limited to 1 figure per province per turn. If you invest koku in the next bin, you can hire ronin. For every koku you spend on hiring ronin, you get 2 ronin figures. Be aware when doing this that the contract with the ronin only lasts for 1 round of play. At the end of the round, the ronin take your money and leave. You can rehire them again the next turn, but you of course have to spend more money to do so. There are also other important advantages to hiring ronin. Also be aware that there is a limit of 30 ronin in the game, so it's possible that you may experience some labor shortages. In the event this happens, turn order dictates who gets the ronin first. Another big advantage of ronin is that you do not disclose their location to your opponents. Each ronin figure that you hire is put on a province card placed face down. While your opponents will know how you spent your money when you reveal your expenditures, they will not know where your hired ronin are hidden. Besides the obvious psychological warfare of this, you can also plan secret attacks. Placing Ronin and the associated stacking limits can be a little bit complicated, so we're going to go through this one by one. The placement of hired Ronin units per province are limited to one less than the total number of regular military units. Military units can occupy provinces in one of three ways. The first is the provincial force. This is the local garrison of military units in the province. These units follow the normal provincial stacking rules of 5 units. Therefore, if you have a full provincial force of 5 units in a province, the maximum Ronin you can bring into that province is 4. Next, a province can also be occupied by an army. An army stacking limit is 15 units. So if we have a fully staffed army, the maximum number of Ronin units that can accompany them is 14. Finally, you can have a province with a provincial force and an occupying army. In this instance, each batch of Ronin is treated separately. If the province has a full provincial force of 5 units, then you can send in 4 Ronin. If the occupying army is fully staffed with 15 units, you can bring in a maximum of 14 Ronin. This means at maximum capacity, you can have 18 Ronin in a province. These guidelines will give you an idea of how many Ronin you can have hidden in a province. And last, but certainly not least, is the ability to bid on hiring the ninja. Bidding for the ninja works similarly as bidding for the turn order, except in this case there's only one ninja and only one winner. That winner, of course, being the highest bidder. Once the highest bidder has won the contract for the ninja, he may use him for 1 round only. Now let's see what you can do with the ninja. The primary use of a ninja is as an assassin. A quick note. Assassination is prohibited in the first round of play, but after that, it's free game. If you've hired the ninja, you can make 1 attempt to assassinate a competitor's daimyo. To do this, you announce your intention, and you point out which daimyo you're targeting. Next, you roll 1 12-sided dice. If you roll a 1 through 8, the assassination is successful. However, if you roll a 9 to a 12, then the assassination attempt is a failure. This failure triggers the next sequence, which is the daimyo's revenge. The player who foiled the assassination then gets to send the ninja back to the player who sent the ninja and attempt to kill one of his daimyo. Then that player rolls the 12-sided dice. If that player rolls a 1 through an 8, then the revenge is a failure and the ninja sequence ends. If the roll is a 9 through 12, then the ninja assassinates one of his former employer's daimyos. So now let's see what happens when a daimyo dies. When the daimyo is killed, the banner figure on the board is placed on its side. The daimyo figure on the army card is also placed on its side. The army is now considered leaderless. While leaderless, the army cannot move and cannot attack. They can only defend. If the army can successfully defend itself until the end of the round, then a new daimyo is elected from one of the figures on the army card. Simply remove that figure and place the daimyo figure upright again. With a new daimyo, the daimyo rank is reduced to level 1 again. The banner figure on the board is also placed upright again, and play continues. However, if the leaderless army is wiped out, then that particular clan dies out, and that player permanently loses one of its armies. If a player chooses not to assassinate another daimyo, then he can utilize the ninja as a spy. During the next planning phase, before everyone reveals their budgets, that player can announce that he's going to use his ninja as a spy and spy on one player's budget. That player will then need to show their budget to the ninja's employer, but they don't have to show it to the other players. Finally, the player who employed the ninja can alter their own budget from what they've learned. Then play continues as normal. A final note on the ninja. Whether you use him as a spy or an assassin, there's a third equally valuable ability. And that's the terror factor of the ninja. Even if you don't use the ninja the entire round, just the psychological threat of the ninja's presence on your side can be enough to unnerve other players. The ninja can become a very useful tool for diplomacy, and I'll leave it at that. When a 5-player game begins, each player has 4 koku to spend. Once they've completed their planning, each player will reveal how they spent their koku. Any koku that was not allocated is lost, so you want to make sure that you allocate everything. Once the reveal is made, the decisions are locked in and it's time to move to the next phase. The next group of actions is covered under the build phase. In this phase, we're going to build out everything we planned in the first phase. First, you're going to resolve the turn order. Any player who bid on the turn order now gets to select which number they want to be in the turn sequence. Start with the highest bidder and work your way down. Any players who did not bid have to randomly select from what's left over. Next, any player that allocated 2 koku to his or her build bin now builds 1 castle or upgrades 1 castle to a fortress. You can only allocate 2 koku to this bin per turn. Therefore, you can either build a castle or upgrade an existing castle. In the next build action, we're going to levy units. If a player purchased units during the planning phase, now it's time to place them. You may only place 1 unit per province per turn. Remember that a province has a stacking limit of 5. And remember, if you hire Ronin, you can only place 1 less than the current provincial force in place. You may also place 1 unit directly onto an army card. Remember, there must be an open space in the army card for you to place the unit. A quick note, placing a unit on an army card also counts towards the 1 unit limit for the province as well. So you can't place a unit on the army card and the province that the army is occupying. In the next build action, any player that hired Ronin will decide which province they're going to hide them in. Remember, place the province you're hiding the Ronin in face down and put the Ronin figure on top of the card. Finally, if you won the ninja in the bid, take the figure and prepare him for action. If a player bid koku and lost the bid, then they've also lost the money. Apparently ninja are not good about refunds. Now that we've built out all our forces and fortifications, it's time to move to the wage war phase. In the wage war sequence, you're going to follow the turn order and conduct each of the 4 steps. Step A, move the Daimyo's army. Step B, declare first battles. Step C, conduct combat. And Step D, final movement. Okay, before we get too deep in the weeds, let's talk about a daimyo's experience. Since a daimyo's experience has a direct impact on the events that are coming up. A daimyo gains 1 rank of experience per turn as long as they fought at least 1 successful battle. A battle is designated successful if the army is conducting an attack, the army does not retreat, and as long as the army removes the enemy presence from the province. Once a daimyo receives higher levels, they can move farther and attack more often. For example, you must level up 3 times before you can move and attack twice. The maximum amount of moves and attacks for an army is 4. Now let's look at Step A, move the Daimyo's army. The best way to think about Step A is that you're trying to move your armies into position to strike. When moving a Daimyo's army, there are 3 different province types. The first is a friendly province, the second is an empty province, and the third is an enemy-occupied province. During Phase A, you can only move the Daimyo's army. You cannot move provincial forces. And the only type of movement that the Daimyo's army can make is to move into a friendly province. The Daimyo's army can make as many movements as their level allows. So a highly experienced army has more range to move into position to strike. While we're talking about movement, let's discuss garrisons. When moving out of a province, if no provincial force occupies the province your army is moving out of, you must leave a garrison behind by removing 1 or more of your units from your army card. In this example, our army wants to move to an adjacent friendly province. However, since there are no units in the province, the army must detach one of its units to act as a garrison. Once a garrison is detached, then the remainder of the army can move onward to the next province. Armies can also pick up units from provinces. This can be conducted in 2 ways. First, when an army begins its movement, it can pick up units from the province it starts in, as long as there is at least 1 unit left to act as the province's garrison. The second way is after an army moves into a new province. That army may pick up extra units in that province as well. Keep garrisons and provincial recruitment in mind as you move your armies in Step A. In Step B, you're going to declare your first battles. During this phase, the player waging war declares which enemy-occupied province and empty provinces he or she plans to attack during Phase C, which is Conduct Combat. A player can advance on one of these provinces with an army, a provincial force, or both. A player may also declare more than 1 battle against the same enemy or empty province. The only requirement is these attacking forces must be adjacent to the target province. Now it's important to know that there's a special first round rule where you cannot declare a battle against an enemy province occupied by a daimyo during the first round of the game. This is basically 1 round of protection so that players can consolidate their forces and not lose their daimyo. To declare a battle, you place a battle marker directly on the border between your attacking province and the defending province. The arrow must be pointed at the province you're attacking. Once the player waging war has placed all the battle markers, then it's time to conduct battles. Let's pause for a moment and discuss double troop provinces. A double troop province is when you have an army and a provincial force in the same province. When declaring first battles from a double troop province, you have a couple of options. The first option is the army or the provincial force can attack alone. The second option is the army or the provincial force can each attack a different adjacent enemy or empty province. Finally, the army or the provincial force can attack the same adjacent enemy or empty province. The difference here is that each will fight their battles with that province separately. So the player will need to decide whether he's going to attack that province first with his army or his provincial force. And that's how double troop provinces work. Now in Step C, the player waging war is going to conduct the actual combat. During Step C, provincial forces and armies can invade adjacent provinces and attempt to conquer them. Keep in mind, it's too late to move forces into friendly provinces. That was the last step. Armies and/or provincial forces can move directly into empty provinces and capture them. The main focus in this step is to engage enemy provinces. Combat is conducted in the following order, in Japanese fashion, from right to left. First, the samurai bowmen attack, and they hit on a roll of 6 or less. Second, the Ashigaru gunmen attack, and they hit on a roll of 4 or less. Third, you will remove casualties from each side. Fourth, the daimyo commander attacks. He hits on a roll of 6 or less. Fifth, samurai swordsmen get to attack. They hit on a roll of 5 or less. Sixth, if you have ronin in the battle, then it's their turn to attack. They also hit on a roll of 5 or less. Seventh, Ashigaru spearmen get to attack. They hit on a roll of 4 or less. And in the 8th and final step, you'll remove the casualties from each side. At this point, the attacking commander needs to decide if he will continue the attack or withdraw. If the attacker withdraws, he pulls back his troops to the province he attacked from. If he chooses to continue the attack, then you go through all these steps again, and so forth until either the attacker withdraws or one side is defeated. Next, let's walk through a battle example to see how all this works. The attacker is moving in with his army of 1 daimyo, 1 bowman, 1 swordsman, and 1 gunner. The attacker also reveals that he has hired 2 ronin who he's revealed in the province he's attacking from. The defending units have a bowman, a swordsman, and a castle with 4 spearmen attached to it. Each side rolls 12-sided dice for their units simultaneously. The combat sequence begins with Step 1, Bowman Attack. There is a bowman on each side, so each side rolls their dice at the same time. Since bowmen hit on a 6 or less, both bowmen score a hit on each side. Each side keeps track of their hits until they reach a remove casualties step. In Combat Step 2, the Ashigaru gunmen get to attack. Since the attacker is the only player with a gunman, they roll alone. The gunman rolls a 1 and needs a 4 or less to hit, so this is another hit on the defender. Step 3 is remove casualties. In this step, each player that has suffered hits gets to choose amongst their own units of which to sacrifice. There are some rules to follow, though, about removing casualties. Players can only choose from units that are involved in the battle. Players cannot select the daimyo unless it is the last figure on the army card. If the defending side has a castle, then those units are selected first. And finally, and the most complicated, you must keep track of your stacking limits if you have ronin in play. You can never get into a situation where you have more ronin than you have regular figures. You must always have at least 1 more figure than ronin. Therefore, sometimes you need to sacrifice a ronin to keep within your stacking limits. A quick note, castle defenders do not count in the stacking limits. So if you have ronin on the defender side, you do not get to count your castle units. So for casualties, the attacker is going to choose his gunman as a casualty. On the defending side, it's pretty clear cut since there's a castle, so the first 2 defenders are eliminated. So we wipe the blood off our hit boards and we're ready for the next steps of combat. In Step 4, the daimyo gets to attack. Since there is only 1 daimyo in this battle, the attacker rolls alone. The daimyo rolls the dice and needs a 6 or less to hit. The daimyo rolls a 7 and misses. In Step 5, samurai swordsmen get to attack. Both sides have 1 samurai swordsman, so they will roll simultaneously. They need a 5 or less to hit. The attacker rolls a 2, which is a hit. the defender rolls a 9, which is a miss. So the defender records 1 hit on their side. In battle step 6, the Ronin get to attack. The attacker is the only player with Ronin, so they will roll alone. The Ronin roll 2 1s, which are both hits. The defender updates his hit record to 3. In battle step 7, the spearmen get to attack. The defender is the only player with spearmen in the battle, so they roll alone. Spearmen need a 4 or less to hit. The spearmen roll a 2 and an 8, 1 hit and 1 miss. So the attacker records 1 hit. Finally, in battle step 8, each side will remove their casualties. So the attacker has 1 hit and the defender has 3 hits. The attacker decides to remove one of his Ronin as a casualty. Sucks to be the hired help. The defender must remove the remainder of his castle defense of 2 spearmen. And he decides to remove his samurai swordsman as his 3rd casualty. The end of the first round of battle is complete, and the attacker needs to decide whether he will continue. If, for whatever reason, he decides to withdraw, the battle is over. In this instance, since there's just 1 bowman left, he's going to continue the battle. And once that decision is made, you start the sequence over again, with bowman step 1. The bowmen have their duel and roll dice at the same time. The attacker rolls a 2, and the defender rolls an 11. The attacker wins the duel and the battle. Since there are no gunmen, the next step is remove casualties, and the defender has 1 figure and 1 casualty. And that is how a battle works in Ikusa. Some final notes on the battle. If the attacking army has an experienced daimyo, then they can proceed with their next attack following this battle. Even if the attacker had withdrawn from this battle, he could proceed on to the next adjacent territory and attack. Withdrawing is not a penalty to daimyo's future attacks. Another Step C attack scenario is the naval invasion. If a player is attacking across a sea line, it is considered a naval invasion. In the event of a naval invasion, the defending forces have a first strike advantage. Essentially, they follow steps of the combat sequence alone for 1 round, before the attacker can fight back. There are some additional rules to follow, though, with a first strike advantage. Temporary bonus units for castles and fortresses don't take part in the first strike defenses. The defending player will roll 1 die for each defending unit in the combat sequence order. Once the attacker removes the first strike casualties, then the normal combat sequence begins. This brings us to Step D, Final Movement. Step D is essentially non-combat movement. In this step, you may reposition a daimyo army or a provincial force into an adjacent province. Obviously, you cannot move into an enemy province because that stage is over. Finally, you're going to finish off the player round by removing the Ronin and collecting Koku. During this step, you will release all Ronin that you've hired during the round, and collect 1 Koku for every 3 provinces that you own. Basically, just like Risk, count the number of provinces, divide by 3, and round down. From this point, play will shift to the next player and they will go through these steps as well, and so on and so forth. Daimyo can be eliminated from the game in 3 ways. The first is by eliminating the daimyo as the opponent's last casualty in a battle. The second is eliminating the opponent's army after the daimyo has been assassinated, basically wiping out the army before they can choose a successor, or finally by assassinating the opponent's daimyo if it is the last unit in his army. So basically, somehow, only the daimyo survives a battle and you send in the ninja to finish him off. When a player has lost all 3 of their daimyos, they are eliminated from the game. When a player is eliminated, transfer control of all of their units and provinces to the victorious player. There are also additional benefits to eliminating another player. That player gets to immediately replace any daimyos they have previously lost on their army card. A player can never have more than 3 daimyo, but he can build back to his original full strength of 3. Be aware that these newly recovered daimyo are the only figures on the army card when they come back. Therefore, it's probably a good idea when you place their army marker to put them in a province with plenty of units that they can pick up. A quick note, all newly acquired units in their provinces can be moved in Step D, Final Movement, since most likely a daimyo will be eliminated in Step C. In a 5-player game, the first player to own 35 provinces wins. This occurs immediately after the 35th province has been taken by a player. However, if you'd like a longer game, you can institute a rule that states that the player must hold the 35th province till the end of all player rounds. That way, a player with the first player marker has to wait until all the other players have played and hold that territory to win. And that wraps up another episode of Harsh Rules. I'm Ben Harsh. I thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode.